previous video, we have seen overview of what is done automatically by threat and vulnerability management features and how it is displayed and accessible to you in a management console. But obviously, that is not enough to remediate vulnerabilities. Now, let's see what you need to do in the scope of threat and vulnerability management capabilities in order to reduce your organization's security weakness. Since threat and vulnerability management features discover weaknesses and detect vulnerabilities, and also generate security recommendations based on that, there is a certain process, steps or set of actions you need to define and execute to reduce organizational weaknesses on top of this discovery done by threat and vulnerability management capabilities. That are so-called remediation steps you need to take care for. So let's see how this should be done in a high level. First, in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Administration portal, you go to Vulnerability Management and then select Weaknesses. And here, for example, you can take any of these vulnerabilities. So this vulnerability is what has been discovered by threat and vulnerability management background capabilities. And when you select it, you can choose Go to Related Security Recommendation, which will show you things that threat and vulnerability management background capabilities concluded that needs to be done in order to reduce organizational security weaknesses. So in this example, we can see security recommendation update Microsoft Office 2013, which means if I update Microsoft Office 2013, this particular vulnerability will be resolved. Perhaps you can conclude now that basically Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution by itself discovered weaknesses and recommended what to do in order to resolve it. So now, for you in the last step remains only a decision, will you do it and who should do it? Or to say, delegation of task execution, something that depends on your organization structure. Will you remediate vulnerability by yourself, or you will delegate this task to some other person in your IT? For purposes of this course, I will do remediation action on a security remediation for vulnerability discovered by threat and vulnerability management capabilities. To do so, let's go on Vulnerability Management, Recommendations. So I need to choose Recommendations. And let's select any of these. So for example, I will select Enable Network Protection. And I can see here on this overview pane description and potential risk telling me more details about things like what is possible risk, possible impact, and when I go to remediation options, it tells me what exactly needs to be done. More specifically, this recommendation is asking me to enable cloud-delivered protection and real-time protection, something we explained in details in one of the previous sections. And as a third step, recommendation tells me to enable network protection in block mode with help of Group Policy, Mobile Device Manager, or Microsoft Endpoint Manager for Windows 10 devices, as it tells here. And if I would click on any of these, it would land me to an official Microsoft documentation page with detailed description on how to do that. Now, if I go back on Vulnerability Management, Recommendations, and when we look at these security recommendations, here below Weaknesses, we can see that for some security recommendations there are more than just one weaknesses. For example, for first one there is 122. For example, if I open any security recommendation with more weaknesses, and if I go to associated CVEs, I can see that these particular security recommendations cover that number of vulnerabilities. Now, if I go back on vulnerability management, on recommendations, and when we look at the security recommendations, there is particularly important column called impact. Let me just show you. It's here on the right. There it is, impact. As you can see here, higher the value is, it means that security recommendation gets the higher priority on this security recommendations list. So it should count for you in making a decision about which security recommendation you are going to focus on. Now, if I again choose any recommendation, for example, let's choose this one. Block untrusted and unassigned processes that run from USB. So I will select this one. And I will choose request remediation. And here I need to review some remediations options or steps before I can request remediation. Now I know that in my environment, Microsoft Defender Antivirus is turned on as the primary antivirus solution, and it also has real-time protection enabled. And I also enable this ASR rule in a block mode using MDM. So that conditions are satisfied, and now I will click Next. First, I will select here Open a ticket in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Remediation due date is something I can define, so let's choose this date. For a priority, let's say it is high priority. And we can leave blank notes, so I will choose Next here. And now I will submit remediation request. And then select Done. And now, if we select Vulnerability Management, and under Vulnerability Management we'll need to select Remediation. And you can see this first one is remediation task we have just created. Now let's go to Microsoft Endpoint Manager as well to see where that task will get listed also. So I will click here. Let's go to Microsoft 365 Administration Center. From there let's select Show All Admin Centers, and from there I can go to Endpoint Manager. Now in the Endpoint Manager I need to go to Endpoint Security, and inside there we have these security tasks. And here you can see it. So basically here you can see tasks that are created and started from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal. And because of background integration, they are sent to Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal. So this is the one we just created. The second one here, let me just move so you can see. Block untrusted and unassigned processes that run from USB. So let me open this task. And here we can see remediation steps that needs to be done. And I can see who opened this ticket. And I can see who opened this task. And also I have an option to accept or reject this task. For example, your IT admin can accept and resolve this task here after your security admin opens remediation task in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal. And best thing is that security admins, as you saw, don't need to type manually what needs to be done as remediation steps. Instead of that, Microsoft's threat and vulnerability management capabilities do all of that in the background. Now, let's say that IT admin wishes to accept this task that security admin delegated to IT team from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal. So to do that, here in Microsoft Endpoint Manager console, IT admin will select accept. Let's do it without notes for these test purposes. Yes. Now switching back to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal. If we go on Vulnerability Management, Remediation, and now when we're here, let's refresh this page a couple of times because it needs some time to synchronize. Let's hit refresh again. So you can see it right here. This is the first task, block untrusted and unassigned processes that run from USB. This is the task we just approved from Endpoint Manager. And here we can see that it is now approved by Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And now I know that IT admins accepted these tasks in their Endpoint Manager console, and that they are now going to execute remediation steps suggested by Microsoft's Threat and Vulnerability Management background capabilities, and delegated by Security Administrator, or whoever does that tasks in your organization. So now let's say that IT Administrator completed all remediation steps related to respective task. Let's go back to Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal and once again open that task. So now when it is done, we did all remediation steps and now we can select complete. Again, without any notes for these testing purposes, yes. So now, back in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint portal, this task will also be shown as completed in a couple of minutes after synchronization. In previous video, we have seen how to report inaccuracy. Now let's add on top of that this inaccuracy reporting can be reported from 3 different scopes. Directly from security recommendations inaccuracy reporting, from software related inaccuracy reporting, and as a device related inaccuracy reporting. So to report inaccuracy directly from security recommendations, you will go to, we need to switch back to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint console, and you need to go to Vulnerability Management. You need to go on Recommendations page. And from there, you need to open security recommendation for which you will report inaccuracy. So just to show, let's open anyone. Let's select this, block Office communication application from creating child processes. And from there, you will report inaccuracy right here. So use case for that kind of security recommendation inaccuracy reporting would be that software for which you are receiving security recommendations doesn't even exist in your organization. On the other hand, if you are searching for specific recommendations for specific applications, for example, if you go here on Vulnerability Management again, let's close this. So if we go on Vulnerability Management and we select Inventories, and now let's select, for example, Chrome. Here we will select Open Software page. And now Security Recommendations. And you say, hey, but I have already disabled Password Manager. In that case, you will select this security recommendation, Disable Password Manager, and report inaccuracy right here. Same thing applies for device-related inaccuracy reporting. So if you go on Device Inventory, let's close this, and I go on Device Inventory, and let's choose, for example, first one, Test Machine 1, and I go to Security Recommendations for that particular machine, and then I say again, hey, but I have already enabled EDR in a block mode for this particular machine. Then, in that case, I will select Enable EDR in a block mode. And again, right here I will report inaccuracy. So now we have showed that on top of the security recommendations generated by Microsoft Threat and Vulnerability Management background capabilities, you can do two things. First one is to execute vulnerability remediation actions suggested by Microsoft Threat and Vulnerability Management background capabilities, or to delegate execution of these remediation execution actions to your IT team by creating a task that will be forwarded to Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal. Second one is to report inaccuracy. And there is the third action you can perform on top of generated security recommendation. This is to create an exception. Now, why would you want to do that? As we explained, inaccuracy is to say a false positive, while exception will be when that particular security recommendation is not relevant at the moment for various reasons. Could be, for example, that it is dependent with some of other systems and therefore you need to carefully consider how to execute remediation actions for that security recommendation. So again, if you go on vulnerability management, let's close this first. So you go on vulnerability management and then you choose recommendations. And now you open anything. For example, let's open first one, update Microsoft Office 2013. And then we choose exception options right next to request remediation. Here we can choose any justification reason. So let's choose this first one, third-party control. And we need to edit this template to provide the justification context. For this demonstration purpose, we will leave it as it is. And we need to choose exception duration from proposed time slots. So let's choose for this purpose 60 days for this example. Important to say is, as it states here, that this exception we will create is going to change exposure score and secure score in Threat and Vulnerability Management dashboard. And now that we know that, we can click Submit to create exception. And that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will explore attack surface reduction in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint solution.